we've had this overabundance and proliferation of online news sources, and most of it is in the area of analysis and opinion. If people understood that the sources they're consuming are actively making them angrier and polarizing them, then they might choose to consume less of that.
Welcome to The Political Independent, your weekly home for a refreshingly nonpartisan take on the news, as well as thought-provoking discussions on how to improve the American political process. Now here is your host, Gregory Anderson.
Welcome, my friends, to episode number 8 of the podcast. Hope your week is going good so far. I do not have an interview today, but what I do have is an episode that I've been promising for probably a few weeks now. This is a redo of Stay Balanced, Stay Informed. This is an episode that I did on the American Electorate podcast. And really what I want to go over today is various sources on the internet, apps, browser extensions, things that really help you balance out your news sources. You know, as it was alluding to in the opening, people are extremely polarized right now, and a lot of that could be alleviated if you sort of balance out your news sources. If you consumed more than just Fox News, or more than just CNN, or more than just the Huffington Post, or more than just, say, the Daily Wire. And there's plenty of ways to do that. And I know that we only have so much time in the day, and not only that, because you have a family, you have other things and several other obligations. But this stuff is emotionally draining. Like, it's been stressful following the news over the course of the pandemic, over the course of this election cycle, really just over the course of Trump's presidency. It's been more stressful than normal because of the feeling of sheer chaos. I'll qualify it as that, because I think some things do get overblown. It's difficult. So the real question is, how do you get the most bang for your time? You know, if you're going to devote time to following the news, how do you do it effectively? And that's really what I want to go over today. We're going to open up with Adfonts Media. So Adfonts Media is truly the most sophisticated, I would say, media bias chart out there. It's the first one that I ever came across, and it's truly amazing. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here in a second. But I want to play a clip here of Vanessa Otero. She's the person who created Adfonts Media and the chart itself, and she's going to talk about how and why she started it.
Have you ever wondered why some of your friends and family's views on things that are happening in the news are sometimes so different from yours? Maybe you have a sense that it has something to do with all the different news sources out there. There has been a lot of talk about bias in the media, and with so many different news sources, how can you really know what's best for you to rely on? You want answers to these questions, not only so that you can understand and have your eyes fully open to what you're reading and watching, but so that you can know what other people are reading and watching and how that affects how they think. Hey everybody, my name is Vanessa Otero, and I created the Media Bias Chart. I created it just by working on it nights and weekends after work. And I shared it with a few friends on Facebook. Actually, 8 people shared it immediately.
Okay, so on to the chart. So it's, if you've ever seen it before, it's pretty complex, and I'm not going to go through absolutely everything here because no one likes to listen to a chart. But I think it's important to kind of go over it. So on the vertical axis on the left, it talks about the article ratings, and it really goes from fact-based reporting to opinion-based reporting. So like it says, original fact-based reporting, fact reporting, complex analysis, opinion/fair persuasion, selective or incomplete story / unfair persuasion, propaganda, contains misleading information, contains inaccurate or fabricated information. On the right side, there's little bubbles. It says most reliable for news, but high in analysis and opinion, and so on and so forth. And the main thing is really at the top. At the top, it says, from like the left, it says most extreme left, hyperpartisan left, skews left, neutral and balanced, and the same thing for the right. Now, if you're wondering what some of the worst ones rated are, and you can see if your a subscriber to some of these places. So some that are in the bottom that fall into that propaganda / contains misleading information is the Wonkat, the National Enquirer, World Truth TV, InfoWars, of course, GN News, and there's a couple others kind of blurred up. The only thing that I dislike about this, because they have some of these jumbled together, but there's an interactive chart where you can kind of move things around. But maybe those aren't ones that you've heard of. Like, I know some of the more popular ones, like Occupy Democrats, Bipartisan Report, Alternate, Daily KOS, Truth Out. Those are ones that have the worst type of ratings for the left. Now, the right isn't really that much better. So then you have like the Daily Wire, Fox News, Breitbart, Red State, ON, Newsmax, Washington Free Beacon, all of these, like one tight cluster, and it's all sort of skews right, mostly into the hyper-partisan right, which that's one thing I find interesting is they're more, I would say, hyper-partisan right, popular news outlets than there is on the left. But they don't include everything that they rate on this particular chart. So there's tons more. Now, what I will do is also link you to the page where it talks about the methodology for the summary. It's a little detailed. So again, I'm not going to spend all your time today going through everything in detail, but the links to all of the things that you hear on this podcast will for sure be in the show notes should you find something that may be useful to you. Okay, so the next one is my favorite, All Sides. I've cited them most of the time. If you listen to the American Electorate, we did their headline roundups literally, I think, just about every episode. I've used a couple, I think, the past week, and I've talked about, and we've done some of their perspectives blogs. So All Sides has their own media bias chart, and it's not as extensive as Advanced Media, doesn't have as, the methodology isn't as complex. Honestly, you can take their media bias test and figure out what yours is. Mine, of course, was in the center. Before we go into some of the other things that I like about All Sides, they actually have a full video that kind of goes over their, well, at least some of their methodologies when it comes to creating their media bias chart, because that's important, because this is primarily objective. And then there are ways for people, like if you subscribe and you're on there, you can contribute to this and rate and actually write in and say, hey, you know, I think this particular news organization isn't actually what you rated it as. I actually think it's lean left instead of censor. I think they actually said that about AP, but here's the clip.
All Sides has created a patented, fair, transparent process to rate the media bias of hundreds of news outlets and writers. We assess each media source and rate them as far left, center, lean right, or far right, allowing you to quickly identify different perspectives. All Sides uses many methodologies to determine bias, including the blind bias survey, gathering people from all parts of the political bias spectrum and having them read and rate articles blindly, without telling them who wrote the article or which media outlet it came from. Then we take the average bias rating of several articles from a given media outlet for our final bias rating. Another powerful method we use is the editorial review. Focus groups of people with multiple political viewpoints who review the works of a media outlet and come to a consensus on its bias. We also look at credible third-party data, including academic research by top universities. Finally, what you say matters. We gather community feedback on our site every day, including hundreds of thousands of votes on our bias ratings. Our final bias ratings aren't determined by these votes, so they can't be gamed or falsified by any group. But we do analyze those votes for input and look for warning signs that our current bias ratings might be off. All Sides is constantly evolving our media bias engine. The more you participate, the better our ratings will be, and the better our news coverage will be. Go to allsides.com to get involved.
Okay, so on All Sides, when you get to the front page, they have what they call headline roundups. You've heard me reference them before. And what they do is they go over through multiple sources. They always have 3 sources that they use for a typical headline roundup, or at least 3 main ones anyway. They basically go through those articles and give you a summary of what other they basically go through those articles and give you a summary of whatever the topic is, and then tell you how each the left and the right cover the story. And this was what also kind of inspired some of the formatting for my podcast, to go over, make sure that, hey, I'm going to give you both the left and the right, and, you know, my opinion over here in the center. And they also have several of these headline roundups. They do multiple ones a day, and there's a link so you can find the rest of them. But this to me is one of the most easiest things you can do. Hey, I'm going to go to all sides and see what's going on in the news, and they're going to give me multiple angles and links directly to those articles that was used to write those headline roundups. That's pretty easy, and that takes seconds. Now, they don't cover everything. Of course, no one covers everything. Too many things going on in the news. But hey, this is a simple way to get multiple angles of a particular story. And one of the other things that, like I said, you've already heard me reference it already here before, is their perspectives blog, where many of the people who work at all sides, they write articles on this blog, and it tells you their media bias rating as well. And it's actually funny because I haven't been to the perspectives blog tab yet today. And the second I go here, we were just talking about the AP. It says all sides moves AP politics to lean left, which is something that I've thought for a while. Honestly, I think The Hill belongs there as well. I don't know if you follow their Facebook page or just the social media, but it seems to be more lean left, and yet they have a center rating. But that's just my opinion. Well, actually, I don't think that's not actually just my opinion, because I'm not the only person who said that. But beyond that, on the top bar here, it does have apps and extensions. This is one of the cool things that I found out about not too long ago, because I didn't even pay attention to it until probably about 5 months ago. But they have a bias finder browser extension. And basically what it does is, whenever you go to a news site and you go up to the top toolbar, you click on it, and you can go over and see, hey, what's the media bias rating for this particular news outlet? And it tells you what all sides has it rated as, whether it's lean left or lean right, and it gives you a little description. But also, what you want to pair that with is NewsGuard, which is what I wanted to touch on next. The next browser extension.
The venture aims to help people navigate through fake news on social media. A recent study reveals nearly half of adults in the U.S. sometimes or often use social media as a news source. But both Facebook and Twitter acknowledge that Russian propaganda reached more than 126 million Americans through their platforms around the 2016 election.
Which I know that sounds like a lot, but it's not really in the context of social media. But please continue.
NewsGuard Technologies is a new $6 million venture that will launch this fall to battle so-called fake news. The startup will use analysts to research and rate thousands of news sources. They hope to license their finding to social media companies and other platforms. NewsGuard Technologies co-founder Stephen Brill is an author, journalist, entrepreneur. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks
for being
Morning.
with us. So tell us how this is going to work.
Well, we're going to apply common sense to a problem that the algorithms haven't been able to solve. We're going to hire dozens of journalists to read and review the 7,500 news and information sites that are responsible for 98% of the consumption in the United States. And it's going to be very simple. They're going to be charged with telling the difference between the Denver Post, which is a real newspaper, and the Denver Guardian, which is a hoax site.
Now, NewsGuard, for the most part, I would say is somewhat similar to Advance Media in the way it breaks things down. It's a little detailed, which is what I like. Now, whenever you download the NewsGuard extension, this pops up on everywhere, whether you're on Facebook, Twitter, when you go to Google, and this little red or green shield pops up next to it, and it kind of gives you sort of the lowdown of the rating. Now, I'll let you know what they have. So they have two sides. One says credibility, the other one's transparency. On the credibility side, it says does not publish false content, gathers and presents information responsibly, regularly corrects or clarifies errors, handles the difference between news and opinion responsibly, avoids deceptive headlines. On the transparency side, it says website discloses ownership and financing, clearly labels advertising, reveals who's in charge, including any possible conflicts of interest. The site provides names of content creators along with either contact or biographical information. So that's awesome. So gives you basically what you would get from Adfunds Media, but in a browser app that's right there whenever you're browsing, whenever you're ready to click on an article from a news source that you're not familiar with, you're going to have tons of information about it before you even click the link. So if it has, let's say, an X by handles the difference between news and opinion responsibly, you're going to have to be a little bit more on your guard. And I think like these tools are extremely helpful. And I implore you, especially if you didn't know about these, use them and pass them along to people that you know over on Facebook. And also, just to make sure you are aware, there is some disagreement on some of these places, particularly NewsGuard. There are people who aren't fans of it. I am, so that's why I brought it to you. But that's why I also gave you All Sides and Adfunds Media, so that way you can choose from which sort of media checker that you're comfortable with. Okay, so now let's talk about organization. So if you have more time on your hands like me, or at least somewhat extra time, or you're trying to be, or you want to be an activist and you still want to have, your balance, news organized. Well, there's a very simple browser tool that you can download. It's called Speed Dial. It's simple. It's really simple. So basically, instead of the empty news tab whenever you open up a new tab on your browser, and I think this is on both Firefox and Chrome, it basically gives you dials of websites, and you could organize all of those dials based off of media bias. And that's what I've done. So I have like a tab for lean left, center, lean right, all organized. And I have all my links there specifically if I want to go there and look at multiple sources. Now, as we were talking about, there's differences between multiple sources on the left and the right. Now, for instance, like on All Sides chart, they have alternate rated as left, whereas they have The Guardian as lean left. They have the Washington Times as lean right, where they have Owen and the Daily Wire, the Daily Caller, Blaze, Breitbart as right, which is more of a hyper-partisan rating. And that's kind of important. And I know one thing that I've noticed about, sometimes I fall into a rut and I'm listening to so much of one source that, I almost instinctively now reorganize all of my listening and watching habits so to make sure that I'm not falling into a hole. Like recently, I would say probably about 3 or 4 months ago, I was getting too much of my information about like the far left on right-wing shows, even though I watch and listen to shows like Kyle Kulinski or David Pakman. I noticed that some of those shows that I was watching from a right perspective were starting to skew my opinions of the left. So it's like I had to change that and sort of push myself back to the center. And it's easy to kind of fall into a rut if you don't have a plan in place. So using that browser extension does help. If you have the time and you want to plan all of this out, if you want to see how my setup is, like, and which ones I actually have in my lean left and my lean right and how I have mine organized, just send me an email over at politicpodcast@gmail.com and I'll send you screenshots. I just didn't think it was necessary to post them on the website. Just it's not that serious, but again, I can send it to you if you are interested. But the apps is what I wanted to go over next. Okay, so the apps are interesting. There is one that I really like, but I'm annoyed that they have, for the most part, ignored the news aspect of it, but it's called Capital Call. Now, if you go to apps over on All Sides, apps and extension rather, there's a little description about it, but I've used it. And basically, as soon as you sign in and you turn on location, it tells you immediately who your U.S. senator is or senators and direct links so you can call them right away, their phone number. Like for me, one of my U.S. senators is Dick Durbin, and I have his phone number right here. So it makes it easy for you to also become super engaged with this. So they also have, like I said, the news tab is sort of like dead, like they haven't updated it, which is sad because like this app has some serious promise, but I still think it's useful up to this point. But it even talks about the elections upcoming, like some of the elections even around the country, but of course the general election upcoming. It even has a tab that helps you register to vote. It makes it easy, like super easy. Even helps you find polling places nearby, ballot information, election info. One of the most great apps, and it's so sad that the developers sort of abandoned the app because you can see that once you download the app, but like it's still useful. I still think it's useful. The other thing that sucks about the news app is that they use rating from all sites, and you can kind of have news sites that you trust, and you can add. So like if you wanted to do basically the browser thing that we were talking about just a second ago, but on your phone, this would allow you to essentially do that all from one app. And that was amazing. But as far as taking action and getting involved, knowing who your representative is, this app, Capital Call, does help with that. Now, there is another one that I have been using. I haven't used it as much recently. It's called News Voice. Basically, they have headline roundups and they have links from like left, right, and center that kind of talk about the stories. So it's very similar, but I'm really not a big fan of the layout. But this may be your other alternative. It's not as organized as the Capital Call app, but at least it's still active. So that would be a way for you to do things mobilely. But then again, even if you don't have necessarily the time, you can still get these things set up so that way when you do, you can have a balanced look at things, because getting your news from just Twitter or Facebook is absolutely terrible. Because really, most people, again, only read the headlines. They're not. A lot of times, people read the headline and then just start commenting on the story. Like that happens quite often. You know, and it's funny. Like a couple of times, like I've done that before, and I got checked on Facebook. So it's like I don't want to do that again. So it's important to go beyond just Twitter and Facebook. Get your news directly from those sources, but also get it from multiple sources. It's easy to fall into a rut watching just left-wing news, watching just right-wing news, and of course, just listening to some of the few center-rated outlets. Because I'm almost certain that I'm not the only news podcast or news source in general that you listen to. It's always important to go to other sources, hear how people are talking about it, and so that way you can decide for yourself once you have all of the pieces to the puzzle. But again, sometimes things are stressful. You may not have enough time. So I hope you use some of these tools we discussed today that help you stay balanced. That is it. I really hope that you got something useful out of today's podcast. If you'd like to reach me, do so at politicpodcast@gmail.com. That is politicpodcast@gmail.com. We will have 2 episodes out for you next week, especially a really interesting one coming on Thursday. I'm hoping to actually have another interview with, not necessarily an educator, but another independent who actually listens to the podcast. I've been talking to him for a couple of weeks, so hopefully we can get him on the podcast and have a great conversation. And I'm open to having anyone on the show who wants to talk and about their independent journey and what they think on current issues. Anyway, hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you next week, my friends.
Hey, look at you. You made it to the end. Before you go, please subscribe and share the podcast with someone you know. Thanks for listening.